3, 2, 1, 0.
What's up, guys? In this video, we're going to be talking about real estate deal structuring. Had a few questions come in about, hey, can we look at the in and out of the wholesale side? What does the paperwork look like that we need to use? And how do we know when to use what tool, right? What paperwork tool? So this is what we're going to do in this video, is basically first explain what our tools are, right? What paperwork do we use as real estate wholesalers? And then in what instances how do we choose and decide between which instances do we use which paperwork, essentially. So it's going to be fun. All right, so first, if we dive into our tools, everything in a box on the board here is a tool, right? So we've got an A to B contract. You've got two variations of that. You've got your standard realtor contract, which is different per state, if not per association, realtor association. Then you've got a custom contract, right, which would be a contract that you have your attorney write up, or some other one has had, some other investor has had their attorney write up, right, that you're copying, maybe. So that's your custom contract. And then we've got an assignment, which is basically giving you permission to assign a position on a pre-existing contract. Right? Then we've got the B2C contract, same thing, you've got custom, or you could use a standard realtor contract. If you're using the standard realtor contract, it's the same as the A to B contract, right? So you're not gonna go into zip forms as a realtor or whatever your association uses to organize your paperwork and see A to B contract or B2C contract, right? A to B just is saying that it's going from the seller of the transaction to the first buyer, right? And then the B2C is taking place in the second escrow of the double close, which is going from the buyer of the first transaction, which was the B player, is now the seller of the second transaction, and the C player is the buyer on the second transaction, right? So same property, two closings, two escrow files. A little bit complicated, but after a while it makes sense. So that's a B2C contract, same custom or realtor contract. Now the custom contracts here will look totally different because they're specific to the investor. They're assuming that the investor will be buying from a seller, so they want it to protect the buyer more on the A to B contract. And on the B2C contract, they want the contract to better protect the seller, right? Because the B is the same person, it's you as the investor. All right, so the custom contracts will look totally different, but the realtor contracts will look the same. The only thing that will be different are the pre-selected boxes and maybe what you write into the additional term section on that contract, right? Between the two. Turning around here, we've got options. You've got two main varieties of options, right? You've got an exclusive option and a non-exclusive option. Basically what an option is your ability, your option to purchase a property for a certain period of time. So if I sign an option with you, let's say I have a house and I'm a seller. And so I'm not gonna sign a contract with you directly, or you don't wanna buy right now, but you want the option to buy my house at $125,000, it's a little house, $125,000 anytime in the next 2 months, right? You would sign an option agreement with me, right? That for $125,000, you have the option to purchase anytime in the next 2 months. And you might pay me a fee for that option, right? So we use a version of that to get equitable interest as wholesalers. So if you're not a licensed real estate agent, then the only way you're able to practice real estate is within the sliver of the law, right? And obviously I'm not an attorney, but within the sliver of the law that is reserved for owners or people with equitable interest, right? Just as an owner, you're able to sell your own house. If you have equitable interest, you're also able to sell the house, right? Even though you're not licensed. In order to get that, you need a contract of some sort, either an option, a B2C contract, an A to B contract, an assignment, or a JV agreement sometimes that gives you equitable interest that allows you to sell. So let's say you don't want to buy right now, but you think that you have an opportunity to sell a property, right? You might go to the seller and say, hey, I don't want to buy your house, so I'm not going to give you an A to B contract, or I'm not going to give you a contract, right? A to B and B2C are internal investor terms. You wouldn't say that to the seller or to the buyer, right? You would just say, like, I'm not going to give you a contract, but how about you give me an option to purchase over the next 2 weeks, and I'll see if I'm able to get my stuff in order on my end to purchase within those 2 weeks. You know, is that agreeable to you? And they say, yeah, sure, it sounds good. We'll do that. We'll sign the option, right? So they sign the option. You can either have an exclusive or non-exclusive. An exclusive option means they are not able to sell the property to anyone else, and they can't give an option for anyone else to purchase their property, right? A non-exclusive means that they can still sell the property themselves, and they could give another option to someone else if they wanted to, right? Cool. Now, in some states, non-exclusive options do not give you equitable interest, so make sure you check with your local real estate attorney there to confirm you're getting good equitable interest before you go to market if you're not licensed in your state. And then good old JV agreements. So these come in all shapes and sizes. I've seen a number of different ways these have been written. The biggest thing here is you need to make sure you're getting equitable interest, which means you have the ability to purchase the contract. If this is just a glorified marketing agreement that says you can market the property and we'll split profit if you sell it, that does not give you equitable interest, and you'd have to be licensed in order to practice real estate underneath that, right? So you want to make sure your JV agreement gives you equitable interest, and the way you get that is you have the right to purchase, right? They're giving you the right to purchase in your JV agreement. Cool. So those are our tools: A to B contract, assignment, B2C contract, options, exclusive and non-exclusive, and JV agreements, right? Let's look at some examples. So example number one, let's say on the acquisition side of the deal, right? We are offering on the MLS. So to acquire, we're making an offer on the MLS. Believe it or not, you can actually do a lot of deals off the MLS if you know what you're doing. So let's say you're making an offer on the MLS. That's how you got the property under contract. So through an agent, you made an offer on the MLS and you're under contract direct to seller. Then on the dispo side, you sell direct to buyer, right? So you don't bring in a dispo wholesaler to help you sell. You don't go through a dispo hub, but you just sell directly to the buyer and you make $9,900 profit, right? So not a bad clip, pretty standard for a wholesale deal in most markets. So awesome. How would you structure the paperwork on that, right? So take a quick second, pause the video, give it your best guess how you would structure the, what contract you would use with the seller here, right? And then what contract you would use here with the buyer. So pause it and give it a shot. Cool. So hopefully you took some guesses. If you're like me, you probably just watched through and didn't do anything, and I understand it happens. But with that, so the correct answer here is, since you're offering on the MLS, there's only one contract that will perform well, and it's the one that the realtors are going to be comfortable with, right? If you're offering on the MLS, you should always be using, I would recommend, a standard realtor contract. It's what the realtor, the listing agent, is going to expect, and it's generally the only thing they're going to be comfortable taking to their seller and advising their seller to sign, right? So on that end, an A to B contract, realtor, right? An A to B because you're going direct to seller, you're the B player, and a realtor contract because you're making an offer on the MLS. Now, direct to buyer, $9,900 in profit. If we do a B2C contract, we're going to create a double close, right, and two separate escrows. The benefit of two separate escrows, right, is that one member of one escrow cannot see the terms of the other escrow, right? So there's a veil between the two escrows. So that means the seller that you're buying from cannot see the buyer that you're selling to until after closing, right? They also can't see the details of the second escrow. So the seller can't see what you sold it for, the buyer can't see what you bought it for, right? So the times where you want to use a double escrow, generally, right, or two separate escrows or a B2C contract, are going to be when you're making more than a certain amount of money that you think the buyer or the seller would be comfortable seeing you make, right? More or less. So for us, that's around $20,000. If we're making over $20,000, then we're going to separate and do a B2C, A to B, right? Two separate escrows, a double escrow. Now, the reason why you don't automatically always do that is because you will incur additional closing costs, right? So in some states, that can be quite a bit, right? It can be thousands of dollars. And so then, let's say you're making $20,000, you double close. Well, now you're going to make maybe $18,000 or $17,000 on the deal. Still good, it created that veil, but it's expensive for that privacy, right? It's an expensive price to pay. So you really only want to do it if not doing it might compromise the deal. If you do an assignment, right, which is this little trusty guy right here, if you do an assignment, then both parties will see what you're making. They'll see the buyer and the other one will see the seller. Now, they can't go around you because you have the contract. You have the contract with the seller, and the seller isn't able to resell the property until they've canceled your contract. And they can't cancel your contract unless you breach the contract yourself, which we don't plan on doing. And so in this case, since this is under $20,000, we're direct to seller, I would use an assignment. So a realtor contract and an assignment would be my answer here. All right, now, example number two, okay? We've got direct to investor is the way we acquired the deal. And then on the dispo side, we're selling through a dispo wholesaler for $12,000 in profit. So what this looks like is, I would consider this a micro flip, because you're getting it from a supplier. So they went out, the AC wholesaler went out, put the property under contract with a seller. So they did their marketing, they're negotiating, they put it under contract. Then they brought it to you to have you sell it. You took it and gave it to another dispo wholesaler who's focused on selling properties, and they sold it, right? Now, there's very specific differences between daisy chaining and micro flipping, right? Which we can explain in another video because you need to be adding value. You need to be adding value, and there needs to be a paper trail all the way through with permission. It's a lot different than daisy chaining, even though at first glance, amateurs might think that they're the same, right? So anyhow, direct to investor, it's how you acquire, so through an wholesaler, and then you sell through a dispo wholesaler, and you make 12 grand profit. Pause the video. Let me know what you thought or what you think you should use. For example, what contract should you give to the wholesaler when you're acquiring, and what contract should you give to the dispo wholesaler when you're selling? Wait for it. Okay, so basically, what I would do here is I would first start with an option to the wholesaler, right? I would start with an option. I would go for an exclusive option, even if it's just for a few days, giving me the right to market the property so the wholesaler can't market it to anyone else. Then once I had found a buyer, since I'm only making $12,000, it's under that $20,000 threshold, I would do an assignment to the wholesaler and an assignment to my dispo wholesaler, right? Now, that's all I have to think about, an assignment here and an assignment here. So 2 assignments, right? I'm going to assignment to acquire and assignment to sell. Now, the wholesaler is likely an A to B contract with their seller, but I don't really have to care about that. And then the dispo wholesaler, based on how much they're making, will either be a 3rd assignment or they will open a double escrow and do a B to C contract, right? So it could go A to B, 2 assignments, B to C, and that's the file. That's the transaction. 2 separate files with 2 assignments. Nice and slightly complicated, but works well, right? And if you're working with a talented, investor-friendly escrow officer or closing attorney, it goes very smoothly. Sweet. All right, moving right along. Example number 3. Okay, so on this one, we acquired the property direct to seller, and we're selling, or we're dispoing the property, right? Because dispo is dispositions, means selling. We're dispoing the property to a buyer. So this is a classic wholesale. We acquired direct to seller, we're selling direct to buyer, right? We don't have an wholesaler or dispo wholesaler. We're not microflip, we're not co-wholesaling, not doing any of the fancy stuff, just the basics, right? So pause it, let me know what you would do. Remember, we're making 25 G's here, what you do for the AC side and what you would do on the dispo side. What tool or what contract would you use here, and which one would you use here? Okay, wait for it. Sweet. All right, we're back. So basically, cool. If you said direct to seller that you would use, remember there's no realtors involved, there's no MLS here, so you have the ability to better protect yourself and use a custom contract. So if you said custom A to B contract, you would be correct. That's what I would choose, right? Unless for whatever reason that seller was super partial to the realtor contract. What I've found is a lot of even direct seller deals that we're doing, they have, like if it's a pre-foreclosure, they have lots of realtors reaching out to them. And so they actually like the fact that it's not realtor related, right? They like that it's a custom contract. And we make sure that they're written so that it protects us, but it does right by the seller, right? We're not interested, the way I like to do business, I'm not interested in 30-day inspection periods with 30-day closes, right? I just don't do that stuff, right? We'll do a 10-day inspection period and 17-day close because the seller can move out and have 7 days to move. But anyhow, custom contracts, long story short, custom contracts, make sure that they protect you, but that they do not like totally disregard the seller's interests. Sweet. So that's AC side, direct to seller. So we did a custom A to B contract, and then on the dispo side, we're selling to our buyer. Normally we would default to an assignment, but we are making 25 GZs, right? We're making 25 grand here, which is over our $20,000 limit. So that's when we're gonna switch to a B to C contract, right? And for this, again, since I'm selling directly to a buyer, I normally would almost never use a realtor contract for the B to C contract unless it was unless maybe I was selling, the buyer was represented by an agent, right? I was selling to a buyer through an agent. Then I would use a realtor contract for the B2C. But in this case, I'm selling directly to the buyer. I want it to be a double close, so I will use a B2C contract for the dispo side in example 3. Sweet. Awesome, guys. That's it for this video. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Drop them in the comments. Thank you for liking, for subscribing, and I will see you guys in next week's video.